Hey everybody, it's Robert and you're watching Sidestep Adventures, and today we are back at the old Waverly Hall Methodist Church. I'm standing here with Mr. Dan and Mr. Dennis McPherson. Mr. Dennis is a member of this Masonic Lodge, so tell me about the lodge.
Well, this is Gordon Lodge number 108, working under the auspices of the Grand Lodge of Georgia. And it's been here quite a while. I think it probably moved here shortly after the church was built across the road there, and they sold it to them. Before that, I believe they met down at the old firehouse. Is that correct, Dan? Yes. And I don't know where they met before that. They've had two different charters. The most recent one, I think, was rechartered in the 40s, and they had one before that. You can tell how old a lodge is in Georgia by what number it is. The oldest one is over in Savannah. That's the Solomon Lodge number 1. In Columbus, we got Columbian Lodge number 7, which is the lodge I was first admitted to. And when I moved out here, I joined this one, and I've been here ever since. It's a nice place for a lodge. It's a hard building to keep up, as you're going to see.
Previous video, we talked about what year it was built, but this building was built in 1896, and this was the second Methodist church in Waverly Hall. The first one was Mount Zion. Mount Zion Methodist Church was the first Methodist church and first church formed west of the Flint River in the new territory when it was ceded to the state of Georgia by the Creek Indians. The church stood east of Waverly Hall on what's now Highway 208. But it was formed in, the records state 1827, but I think that it was probably formed a little bit earlier than that because the community itself was formed much earlier. And the first church building that was built in around 1830 or 31. And when the railroad came through, a lot of the businesses came and relocated here. And so they thought it was best to build a church here in town. So this building was built, and the congregation moved here, and the building was dedicated not long afterwards. And shortly after its completion, the dedication sermon was preached by Reverend Sam Jones, who was a well-known Methodist evangelist at that time. And the original front of the building had two front porches. It had a little porch on this side. This was the original entrance, and it had a little porch over there. There's another entrance over on that side. But front of the building had one large window with one smaller window on each side. Maybe you can see on the inside here. But this was the original front entrance, and this is the base to the steeple. The steeple was here. Of course, we saw the outside of the building. The steeple's been trimmed off in years past. But when I come in, this was the original entrance. And you can see where the rope came through the ceiling right up there for the bell. So the rope hung right here. They probably had it tied off over here on the wall. But I'll follow you. The original latch. I don't know if this will open or not. Should. There we go. Notice the detail. May have to shine a light on it to see it.
Oh wow.
The door casing also. Mm-hmm. This building was used as a Methodist church for Waverly Hall until around 1948 or 49, when the building just across the street was built, or next door across the little side street out here. This building was used from 1896 until 1948 or 49. And after that, it was sold to the local Masonic lodge. And Dennis just stated that the lodge used to be located in a different building here in town. And the lodge moved here and did much of the renovation work as far as the floor covering that's in here now. But pretty much everything else is just as it was the day this building was dedicated. You have the original ceiling with original varnish on it. The ceiling's never been painted. The windows still exist behind these sheets of plywood. The only window that I don't know if it exists or not is this one on the front of the building. It's much larger at one time, as you can see. It went all the way up, what is that, about 15 feet up there? You can see that it was plastered over. So you had one large window and one smaller window on the front of the building. And those windows may still exist behind that plywood, I'm not sure. But later there was an air conditioning system, central heat and air put in, and they came through that window and ran down the center of the ceiling here, and it was really an eyesore. I'm glad that it's been relocated. And something else that's unusual about this building is the sloped floor. It's an auditorium floor that was very popular in those days, so that the people who sat on the back pew could see over the heads of the ones in front and see down front. It is. When electricity was put into the building, these are the first light fixtures that were put in probably in the 1930s. I'm sure they need rewiring, but those have just in recent years been taken down and replaced with ceiling fans. This area back here would have been the Sunday school rooms that were added on in 1923. Now the outdoor weather sheathing that's underneath the weatherboarding out there is, and the framework is all lumber from the old Mount Zion church. It was taken apart, the lumber was reused here. There's one or two pews from that church that still exist, and they are over, well, one of them's over in the Methodist church next door now.
This is the charter that was created in 1946 with the Grand Lodge of Georgia, but they were in existence before then, but there must have been a period of time where they lost the charter and had to be rechartered in 1946.
This is one of the original sanctuary windows here in the auditorium. As you can see, it used to have molding on here so that these windows could be raised, but the molding was removed and they put plywood, well, sheetrock over these windows. This piece of sheetrock was removed a couple of years ago because they wanted to see if the windows were stained glass or what, but it turned out that they're just frosted glass. Now originally, there was a choir loft here behind the pulpit. The pulpit being that it was, preacher had, I'm sorry, Scott. There was a lectern here, and the area behind there was open. And there was like a large bay window area that had pews in it, and that's where the choir sat. And that room was torn off when they added the addition onto the back of here in 1923. And they sealed this up, and you'll see in a few minutes that the stairway is back there going downstairs. The choir was brought out. They built a little stage out here a little further, and the choir was put there behind where the minister would stand. But as you can see, looking out over the congregation, this was a large building, and this would house a lot of people, large crowd.
And Dan, what you said when we were first coming in here, this building is a lot bigger than you think.
It's much bigger on the inside, or it looks much bigger on the inside than it does outside. And you got to witness coming in here in the dark.
Yeah.
So you can imagine. I mean, this is the darkest place in the world at night, especially when you cut off all the lights. This is a dark place. This building originally, when it served as a church, it had 2 aisles that came down. So there were 3 sets of pews. There were long pews in the center, and then there were shorter pews on each side. And one funny story that I've always heard was back in the old days, this church, of course, it was on a circuit with other churches. They called it a charge. And this church was originally on the Hamilton charge. It was on the charge, in other words, it was larger than Hamilton Methodist Church, which is the county seat 12 miles from here. But the parsonage was located over there originally, and the preacher had to come from there over here to preach on Sundays. And back in the old days, when the roads were really bad, there was one preacher named Bascom Anthony, I believe. He actually walked from Hamilton over here and would preach. And then he would spend the night here somewhere and then go back home the next day and would walk back if he didn't have a ride. But anyway, the church was on the same charge for a while with Olive Branch out in Talbot County, and then Methodist Chapel in Talbot County, and of course Ellerslie later. Ellerslie Methodist Church was formed in 1910. And then another church called Prospect, which was over at Ridgeway, the community that suffered the storm. But Ridgeway, the Prospect Methodist Church was rebuilt, and it existed over there until the 1920s when it closed and the membership was moved here. But this was a very large congregation at one time. And Waverly Hall Methodist Church is still very active. But the congregation outgrew this building, and that was when they decided to build a new brick building that didn't have to have the upkeep that this one needed. And this one, when it was sold over to the lodge, of course, they removed all of the pews. I don't know what became of the majority of them. I'm sure they were given away to other churches back in those days. But a few of the pews were kept, and they are next door in the building over there. But anyway, the 2 aisles that came down, one of the stories that I remember about that was involving the Geneva Methodist Church. All of the youth back in those days would get together. Nowadays it's called MYF, and back then it was called Epworth League, and it was the young people of the church would get together and have programs. And the Epworth League had sub-district meetings, and one of the meetings was held here, and it was decided that the Christmas program that they put on would be held here in this building. And they would have it at a different church each year. Well, it became Waverly Hall's turn, and my daddy's brother Lewis was in the Christmas program, as was my daddy. And anyway, my daddy was number 4 out of 6 boys. And there were several carloads of people that came from Talbot County over here to have part in the Christmas program. And the roads were just muddy back then. There was no pavement anywhere. And this was about 1938 or 39. And Uncle Lewis and I think Mr. C.E. Parker and Milton Fuller were supposed to come down the aisle singing "We Three Kings." And Uncle Lewis came the Talbotton Road with friends, and they made it here. The other guys came through the back roads from Box Springs and a little community south of here, and they ran off in a ditch in the mud and got stuck. So Uncle Lewis came down the aisle singing "We Three Kings" by himself, solo. And he talked about that all of his life, that was the most humiliating experience of his entire life. But we still talk about that when we have family get-togethers. So that's one experience that I know of here in this church. I know of a lot of other people that have a lot of memories attached to this building. I think the last wedding here was Miss Mary Vance Alford and her husband, Mr. James Alford. And I used to know who the last funeral was and who the first wedding was and the first funeral next door, but I don't remember. I may have it written down somewhere. This is a paper that I have in my collection. I also serve as historian of the Waverly Hall United Methodist Church at present. And this is one of the papers that I acquired years ago. This is a statement from William E. Thomason. Now, William Thomason, I'll give you a little bit of background about him. He was an African-American man who moved to Waverly Hall as a school teacher. I believe he came here in the late 1870s, maybe early 1880s as a school teacher. He had beautiful penmanship. He opened a jewelry and watch repair business here in Waverly Hall after the railroad came through. And he was very well respected. He married a local lady here in town, and they had a house full of children. And those children all grew up, and most of them left here. Some of them stayed. There's still descendants of Mr. Thomason that live here in town today. But Mr. Thomason contracted with Methodist Church. He was the custodian here for many, many years. I think they called them sextons back in those days, but everybody around here just referred to him as the custodian of the church. April the 4th, 1904, an account with the Methodist Episcopal Church for the month of March 1904. To cleaning and refitting 14 large burners, 5 cents each, 2 dozen wicks for same, 15 cents per dozen, fitting same in burners and timing, or trimming, 5 cents, repairing pulpit lamps and chandelier, 25 cents, for services, ringing the bell, sweeping, and lighting up, etc., $1.75. So the total amount for the whole month of that would have been for the month of March, $3.05 total amount due. Something else that I have in my records is one of the old bulletins from this church, which features a picture of the front of the church. And this was from March of 1940. And the story behind this bulletin goes that the pastor at the time, who was Reverend W.D. Rayburn, wanted to do a church bulletin. And the church had never done a bulletin before. You know, this was actually the program. It would have the order of service for that Sunday here, and then it would have announcements and so forth. And Reverend Rayburn had moved here, and he wanted to start doing a bulletin. And some of the church members said no. In particular, Mr. Will Pitts, who was a multimillionaire, he said no, that the paper was expensive and the little mimeograph machine to make these copies. He says, no, we're not doing that. So Reverend Rayburn went out and sold ads.
Wow.
I feel sad. And one of the ads is the home trading company was Mr. Pitt's store. Mr. Pitts bought an ad for the back of this bulletin. But he went to the stores, the leading businesses here in Waverly Hall, and then he went to other businesses that did business with people who lived here in town. So you've got businesses in Hamilton and even a few in Columbus, like the Striffler funeral director of Columbus, and the shoe store that was downtown, Cumbay's, that was very popular back in those days. But anyway, after Mr. Rayburn sold these ads and got up enough money to buy a mimeograph machine, they had these bulletins printed up. They were just blank stock with a picture of the front on the picture of the church on the front, and then he could print the inside. And that's how the bulletins got started, and they're still printed to this day. This is the other entrance that came in from the front porch. We didn't really look at it. I think it's amazing that these doors are in such good condition, having been exterior doors for so long. Of course, they for many, many years, they had a little porch out over a little stoop area with a shed.
And so Dan, I want to ask real quick, this is the original exterior of the building
Yes,
here,
there
correct?
would be weatherboarding, lap side boarding behind this.
And when was this added on?
This was added on when the Masons bought the building. This was used for their rituals in here. It's where they changed clothes and did certain things. Storage area for things. And they used to have a gallery of photographs of all the former lodge masters, but I don't see those now.
And then this was an exterior wall, right?
That was, you can see the old window there that's been covered up. And this would have been the front porch across here. One thing I think that we do need to note is a little history of the Masons, bringing it up to date. The Masonic Lodge here was very strong over the years, and at present there are about 8 active members, and those members are getting up in age and they're not really able to come and do the things that need to be done here. They don't have the meetings here as often as they used to. I think the meetings that they do have, they meet downstairs in the old fellowship hall area. But the lodge members, I understand, they're not really able to keep this building up the way it used to be. There's just not funds for it. And I certainly understand that and respect that. When the Masonic Lodge was very active in the community here, they did a lot of good for this community. I realize that there's a lot of people that, you know, they have negative feelings about the Masons. I personally don't. My family, we're all Masons. I'm not a Mason, but a lot of my ancestors were, a lot of my good friends were, and still are. But I have no reason to find anything negative about the Masonic Lodge, because they did a lot of good in this community, and the ones that I knew that were part of it, they were far from anything that is described negatively in documentaries and so forth. The Masons here, it was a tradition that they made chili and had a chili dog stand at the Chattahoochee Valley Fair every year. And one of the things that I can remember is going to the fair, and Mrs. Eva McLendon would cook the chili, and my daddy and different ones would help with the chili and the hot dog stand. And that was how they raised their funds for once a year, was at the Chattahoochee Valley Fair. And I can remember back in the early 1980s, I remember Reba McEntire being on stage down there, and when she finished performing, or maybe it was right after her performance, I can't remember if it was before or after her performance, but anyway, she came to the Masonic Lodge stand and got her a hot dog and some chili, and I can remember her in her cowgirl outfit, propped up against a light pole, eating a hot dog. And that was the first time I had ever seen Reba McEntire. I had never heard of her, and I'm sure no one else even knew who she was then. She was just a performing act on the midway, as they called it.
Hey Dan, is this original to the church, or is this something the Masons added in?
This is all original, and this is original as well. That's been painted, but this is original, and that is the original molding and all that was around the old choir loft area. And I see that the original front doors are still here. These would have been the doors that went on that side over there, where they took them down to make the addition. I'm surprised, I didn't know those were here. But this was the area that was added on, 1923, and this is really kind of a time capsule. I don't think anything has ever been done to this back here. As far as making any changes to it. I don't know if this light works. Yes, it does. And I can see some of the old Mount Zion Church lumber here. Most of it rotted, but there's a wide board right there that squirrels ate it. You can see the squirrels live in there now.
And that comes off of the 1830s church?
Yes. That's the weather sheathing under the weatherboarding on the outside of this building. Yeah, that goes into the attic on this addition. Right. There you go, Ron. Get up that.
An attic?
You like climbing up and... It looks like it's been...
It looks like it's boarded over, doesn't it?
It does. It shouldn't be, because there is an attic above this. There was a big electric fan up in that attic.
Looks like it has.
And this is not the men's room or the ladies' room. This is the toilet. I'm not sure what that is.
Oh, look.
That is a symbolic something.
But look above the symbolic.
Oh. Yeah. There's a room up there with daylight. I see now why that stuff is stacked there. Someone used it to scuttle up in that hole. There may be someone living in here, Robert.
All right, so this is just another Sunday school room?
Yes, this goes back into the auditorium area. Okay, so underneath here, this was the old church fellowship hall. It takes a second for the light to come on. There we
There
go.
it is.
And as you can see, this was a very small area, but they had some big church social dinners down here on special occasions. They had a kitchen back there. And of course, the Masons later used this. They had spaghetti suppers and they cooked meals and had steak dinners and things down here as fundraisers. They have recently, in just past 4 or 5 years, done some work in this kitchen. They put up some new tile here. Looks much better than it used to.
And when was this originally built?
This kitchen,
This, the fellowship hall?
the fellowship hall was built under here, I think, in the 1930s. This was originally the just crawl space underneath the church, and the old schoolhouse was across the road, and it burned in 1907. But prior to that, that's where all the local kids went to school, and on rainy days and on very hot days, the kids would come over here and play up underneath this building. And I'm told that the original floor joist underneath here that's now covered up with ceiling, that all of that is marked up with pieces of chalk where the kids wrote their names and played games and various things. There is an old crawl space back up under the front part of the sanctuary, but I don't see that we have access to it here. Mike can access it from outside. But as all the place around here, all the rooms were heated with a potbelly heater long ago. And I do have another one of those receipts from Mr. Thomason where he actually came and built fires in the stoves on early in the morning so that the church would be warm by the time the congregation got here.
This is just storage.
Yeah, but there's more old Sunday school rooms under here. Here we have a ton of stuff just being used for storage. I'll get out of your way if you want to look in there. That is a Sunday school room that was turned into a men's and women's restroom later on. And this is another Sunday school room. Everything here is pull chain lighting. How about that color scheme on the walls? You can tell that's original. And another stove flue. This was all mostly the equipment that they used at the fair for the hot dog stand. I saw a pile of aprons upstairs. And this is the other side of the fellowship hall, which originally that wall was not there and the entrance was up there. I think you've got a picture of the outside of the building that shows the door down in that pit from outside. And there were 2 windows here. And then we can exit the building here on the side and you can see where the current church is in relation to this building.
All right, and since the last time we were here, this wall of the church has actually been painted as volunteer work by the next door neighbor.
Even patched this. You know, all this was missing.
Yeah.
He's patched all that. That looks much better.
All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this tour of this incredible old building, the old 1896 Methodist Church turned Masonic Lodge. A big thank you to Dennis and the Gordon Masonic Lodge number 108 for allowing us this tour. I hope you've enjoyed. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. And also, thanks to Dan and Scott for coming out and touring it with us. And Dan, thank you for all of your knowledge.
Thank you. Anytime.
We are locking up the Masonic Lodge as it's time for us to leave. What are we about to demonstrate, Mr. Dan?
How dark it is in here without the lights.